So what is toxic empathy?
Toxic empathy is a tool of emotional manipulation into believing the progressive perspective is the compassionate and loving one.
It's sort of like who can outdo each other in being nice today.
Yeah.
And niceness isn't always what's loving.
The question has to be not how do you feel or how does that person feel? It's not necessarily unimportant, but it's incomplete. The question is what is true and what is right. To decide that, you have to look at what is scientifically, factually true, historically true, but most important for the Christian, what is biblically true.
I have seen toxic empathy, certainly on the left, and I'm seeing it on the right.
Trans women are women is the same math as love is love. Because you're refusing to define what those things are, it's just a secular mantra that can mean anything you want it to mean. Adoption redeems an already broken situation, whereas surrogacy, egg selling, sperm selling creates that broken situation.
It's a massive social experiment that has never been done before in the history of humanity.
This Christless, secular, conservative movement that we have, at the end of the day, that's going to wash away like everything else because it's not anchored.
Allie Stuckey, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
It was so fun having you on earlier this year.
Yes, I know. I always love to be here.
We were talking about motherhood and women stuff.
Yes,
all of that.
All the good stuff.
And I just saw your girls recently. They're all beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
And
they're fun.
You're coming out with a book. In fact, when we're filming this, it's I think a week before D-Day for the book, but the book's out now, right?
Yes. Toxic Empathy, How Progressives Exploit Christian Compassion, which everyone says that's a very zingy title. I don't know if I necessarily meant it to be, but I guess it does kind of grab people's attention just because we only hear empathy talked about in positive terms, which is why I wrote the book.
So what is toxic empathy?
Toxic empathy is a tool of emotional manipulation that is, I would say, primarily used by the left simply because progressivism controls most of the media, most of the channels of information and communication and influence that we have. And so they use this tool to manipulate, I would say in particular women, I guess you could say everyone, but even more specifically Christian women into believing that the progressive perspective on a particular issue is the compassionate and loving one. And there's a formula they follow to use this, to employ this tactic basically on every subject. They'll hoist up a particular victim. They'll tell you their heartstring pulling story, and they will lead you either explicitly or implicitly to conclude that affirming this person's choice, affirming this person's feeling is the righteous and moral and compassionate position. And so you're left with thinking, well, the only loving thing to do, the truly empathetic thing to do, because I feel how this person feels, the story has put me in their shoes, is to affirm whatever choice they want to make. Affirm their choice to abort their child, affirm their choice to quote unquote change their gender, affirm their choice to marry whomever they please, affirm their choice to cross the border illegally, affirm the lawlessness that I see promoted by social justice ideology, all because you feel that you are helping the least of these. And we'll get into it, but this is actually, the reason I call it toxic is because this strategy blinds you to both reality and morality. The truth is, on every side of the issue, there are people that are affected. There's people that could be hurt on the immigration issue, on the abortion issue. It's not just the person that the media hoists up as the victim. There are other people who are affected by whatever policy or ideological position we hold. And so when we're looking at people on both sides of the issue and both people evoke our compassion and empathy, the question is, especially for the Christian, well, what do we do? Which is why we can't be led by empathy, because if we have empathy for everyone, we're constantly just in our puddle of emotions and we don't know what to do. We can't make a policy decision, which is all about trade-offs anyway. So the question has to be not how do you feel or how does that person feel? Because that can only get you so far. It's not necessarily unimportant, but it's incomplete. The question is what is true and what is right. And so to decide that, you have to look at what is scientifically, factually true, historically true, but most important for the Christian, what is biblically true. And what is biblically true is not always going to feel good to every party involved. But what is biblically true is always the most loving thing, because love and empathy are not the same. Empathy is a feeling, but love seeks what is best for someone as God defines best. And that's really not a matter of emotions. That's a matter of righteous perspective, but also action.
Such a good point. I think with the empathy topic, empathy is important. It is important to be inside someone else's shoes. But like you're saying, feelings are not the definitive end of anybody. And also sometimes your feelings might happen and you still have to do the tough thing or the hard thing.
Right.
I think about like the obvious case of an example of someone who is committing crimes, stealing or being violent against someone in public. You can have empathy for them and still recognize they're a threat to themselves and others, and they need to be probably in prison, that depending on the circumstances, or a mental ward if it's a mentally unstable moment. And what's most loving for that person as the aggressor in that scenario is to actually remove them from a place where they're harming themselves or others. So that, you could call that maybe tough love, but that is ultimately loving. Mm-hmm. That is the most loving thing that you can do.
Yeah.
So I think this is often lost in our conversations about public policy, is that sometimes the tough love thing for the sake of that person and for the other people who might be endangered is the right decision. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to start with back to your title, which is a great title, by the way. The idea of toxic empathy is a really important one, because it's sort of like who can outdo each other in being nice today.
Yeah.
Especially for women, like I'm so nice. No, you're so nice. And niceness isn't always what's loving. Mm-hmm. But you talk about progressives. I'm going to start with that because I have seen toxic empathy, certainly on the left, and I'm seeing it on the right. Mm-hmm. And particularly right now, we're in an election cycle. There's a lot of toxic empathy on the issue of abortion.
Yeah.
Where you're seeing people on the right politicians, like right now the Trump campaign, J.D. Vance, even in the vice presidential debate last week, he was saying that we need to be more understanding of women basically who have abortions. Gain their trust as if being pro-life means you are violating someone's trust. That was the implication that was so bad there, is that you're pro-life, you are opposed to the killing of children. You know abortion's not good for women, even if it's what society is telling them is good. But J.D. Vance made this comment about some, girl that he knew that was in an abusive relationship. She had an abortion, and basically it was like a concession. Like, okay, those who support abortion, we need to be more understanding, because in tough situations,